The humid Portland summer pressed down like a wet blanket, trapping the smell of hot asphalt and exhaust fumes. 16-year-old Ben fidgeted at the kitchen table, listening to the relentless buzz of saws and thud of hammers from the backyard, where his parents were obsessively building their dream cottage. He was already dreading months of fetching tools and breathing plaster dust. His grandmother, Eleanor, sat across from his mother, her hands clasped around a mug of tea. "Sarah," Eleanor said, her voice soft but carrying a firm resolve. "I need to go to Willow Creek to see Helen. We're not getting any younger and, well, who knows when we'll get another chance." Ben's ears perked up. Willow Creek. The name conjured images his grandmother had painted over countless visits. Towering ancient forests, a winding river sparkling like liquid silver, the profound silence broken only by birdsong and wind in the pines. It was a world away from the city chaos and the current construction zone his home had become. "Grandma, take me with you," Ben burst out before his mother could respond. "Please? I'd be so much help. And honestly, stuck here all summer handing Dad nails and mixing mortar." He trailed off, hoping his desperation was palpable. His mother, Sarah, surprised him. "Actually, Ben, that might not be a bad idea. Give you a break from the dust, and you could help Grandma." She turned to Eleanor. "If you're sure you don't mind the company, Mom?" Eleanor smiled, a network of kind wrinkles deepening around her eyes. "I'd love to have him, Sarah. Good company on the journey." 2 days later, Ben found himself squeezed into the worn passenger seat of a rattling old van, heading deep into the Pacific Northwest. The 10-hour drive felt longer, the paved highways eventually surrendering to winding gravel roads that snaked through valleys choked with ferns and flanked by sheer cliffs draped in moss. Finally, as dusk painted the sky in bruised purples and oranges, they crested a hill, and Willow Creek lay below, a cluster of maybe a dozen weathered houses nestled in a clearing at the edge of an impossibly vast forest. Ben felt a surge of excitement mixed with an unfamiliar sense of isolation. The welcome was warm, almost overwhelming. The few remaining residents, mostly elderly, gathered on Helen's porch. Helen, Eleanor's sister, was a sturdier version of her sibling, her face deeply lined but her eyes bright. Introductions were made. Old Mrs. Henderson with her perpetual knitting, gruff Mr. Davies who ran the general store, and then there was Victor. Victor Miller was Helen's brother-in-law, a retired forest ranger who spent summers in Willow Creek. He was a solidly built man in his late 60s, with hands like gnarled roots and eyes that held the deep, watchful stillness of the woods he knew so intimately. He clasped Ben's hand in a firm, calloused grip. "Ben, last time I saw you, you were knee-high to a grasshopper." Victor boomed, a genuine smile spreading across his weathered face. "Look at you now. City life treating you all right?" "Better now I'm here, Mr. Miller," Ben replied, returning the smile. Victor's presence was instantly reassuring. He radiated competence and an easygoing strength. Helen's house was cozy but cramped. Ben was given a small room at the back, dominated by a sturdy iron-framed bed. Exhausted from the journey, he fell asleep almost instantly to the symphony of crickets and the distant hoot of an owl. He woke to sunlight streaming through the open window, carrying the intoxicating scent of pine resin and wildflowers. The air was crisp and cool, a balm after the city's stale heat. The sound of laughter and clattering dishes drifted from the kitchen. He dressed quickly and joined Eleanor and Helen, who were bustling around the stove, frying bacon and eggs. Victor was already at the table, nursing a mug of strong black coffee. "Morning, sunshine," Helen chirped, Sleep well in the wilds? Like a rock, Ben grinned, inhaling the delicious aromas. It's so quiet and smells amazing. After a hearty breakfast of eggs, bacon, and thick slices of homemade bread, Victor pushed his chair back. Well, Ben, how'd you like to earn your keep? I was thinking of heading up to the old ranger cabin today. Check the trails, maybe see if any deer are moving. It's a fair hike, about 10 miles in. We could stay the night if the weather holds. Ben's heart leapt. Seriously? That sounds awesome. The thought of exploring the deep woods with Victor, a real expert, was exhilarating. Eleanor looked slightly concerned. You'll be careful, Vic? That's a long way for the boy. Ellie, I've walked these woods since before Ben here was a twinkle in his daddy's eye. Victor reassured her, though Ben noticed a fleeting seriousness in his eyes. He'll be fine. We'll take it steady, pack plenty, and we've got the cabin if the weather turns. They packed efficiently. Victor's well-worn rucksack held essentials: water, food, a first aid kit, waterproof matches, a small axe, and crucially, his bolt-action hunting rifle and a box of shells. Ben carried a lighter pack with extra water and food. Victor handed him a sturdy walking stick. Trust me, you'll appreciate it later. The initial part of the hike was idyllic. The forest path wound beneath a cathedral canopy of ancient Douglas firs and cedars. Sunlight dappled through the high branches, illuminating shafts of dust motes dancing in the cool air. The scent was overwhelming: damp earth, decaying leaves, the sharp tang of pine, and the sweet perfume of unseen wildflowers. Birdsong echoed constantly: the liquid trill of thrushes, the sharp tap, tap, tap of woodpeckers, the occasional raucous cry of a jay. Victor pointed out animal tracks: the delicate cloven hoofprints of deer, the broader pad of a coyote, the distinctive five-toed mark of a raccoon. He named plants and trees, explaining which berries were edible and which were best avoided. They stopped at a clear, fast-flowing stream around midday. Victor produced a collapsible rod and a small tackle box. Lunch, he declared. Within half an hour, they'd caught 3 plump rainbow trout. They built a small, efficient fire on a gravel bar, gutted and cleaned the fish with practiced ease, and roasted them on green sticks over the flames. The simple meal, eaten with their fingers, tasted better than anything Ben could remember. As the afternoon wore on, however, the idyllic feeling began to fade. The terrain grew steeper, the path less defined. They clambered over massive moss-covered logs that had fallen decades ago, their wood softened by time and weather. Thick underbrush snagged at their clothes, and low branches whipped back, sometimes catching Ben across the face if he wasn't vigilant. Sweat plastered his shirt to his back, and his legs began to ache with a deep, unfamiliar burn. The forest, while still beautiful, started to feel immense and slightly oppressive. The constant birdsong seemed to lessen, replaced by a deeper, watchful silence broken only by the rustle of unseen creatures and the creak of ancient trees. Real forest hiking isn't quite like the movies, is it, son? Victor remarked, noticing Ben lagging slightly. His breathing was steady, his stride unwavering. It demands respect, pays to be prepared and pay attention. Ben nodded, too breathless to reply, focusing on placing his feet carefully on the uneven ground. Finally, as the sun began its descent, painting the high canopy gold, they emerged from the dense woods onto the edge of a vast clearing. It stretched for hundreds of yards, filled with tall, lush grass swaying gently in the evening breeze. Beyond it, nestled against the tree line on the far side, Ben could just make out the low, dark shape of a small log cabin. Relief washed over Ben. There it is! He started forward eagerly, aiming straight across the field towards the cabin. The direct route would save precious minutes as dusk gathered. Victor's hand shot out, grabbing Ben's arm with surprising strength. "Hold up, Ben. Not that way." Ben stopped, confused and irritated. The ache in his legs flared. "Why not? It's right there. Cutting straight across saves us at least 20 minutes. Easy." Victor's expression was firm, his eyes scanning the expanse of tall grass. "We go around. Trust me." "Trust you? Why?" Ben's youthful frustration bubbled over. "It's just a field. Basic geometry, Mr. Miller. Straight line is the shortest distance." He gestured emphatically towards the cabin. Victor sighed, a long, slow exhalation. He looked at Ben, not with anger, but with a weary gravity that instantly dampened the boy's defiance. "All right, Ben. Listen, it's not about geometry, it's about that field." He nodded towards the swaying grass. "That field has a history, a bad one. Folks around here have learned to give it a wide berth." Ben's irritation warred with a sudden prickle of unease. "What history? What happened?" Victor leaned on his walking stick, his gaze fixed on the distant cabin as if measuring the long way around. "Years back, decades now, this field belonged to the whole community. It was prime hayland. Every summer, the village elder, old Mr. Davies's father back then, would divide it into strips for each family to cut. He tried to be fair, sharing out the good patches and the thinner ones. One summer, though, your grandma Eleanor was helping her sister Helen, my Helen, with their section. They were working hard, sweating under the sun." Victor's voice dropped slightly, taking on the cadence of a storyteller recounting something unsettling. Helen noticed something. Over on another strip, the elder's daughter Polly was working. Only Polly seemed to be moving awfully fast, covering ground quicker than seemed possible. Helen pointed it out to Ellie. "Look," she said, "Polly's practically flying through her section, and look at the grass there. It's thick as a mattress. Ours is thin and patchy." They thought maybe the elder had favored his own kin with the best land. They kept working, grumbling a bit. He paused, the memory clearly vivid. Then they heard Polly calling, shouting and waving her arms, way off at the far edge of her strip, near where the woods start again. Helen told Ellie to go see what Polly wanted. She'd keep working. So Ellie trudged all the way across the field towards Polly. Polly kept calling, waving her over, but she seemed further away than she should have been, like the field was stretching. Ellie said she got closer, close enough to see Polly standing right at the tree line. She was smiling, Ben, a big, wide smile. But it wasn't right. Didn't reach her eyes. And she kept beckoning Ellie to come closer, into the woods. Ellie stopped, said a cold feeling washed over her, like ice water down her spine. She turned around and ran back to Helen. "What happened then?" Ben asked, his earlier annoyance completely replaced by morbid fascination. When Ellie got back, Victor continued. She was white as a sheet, trembling. She told Helen, that wasn't Polly. That was something else. Something wrong. Helen tried to calm her, saying Polly must have gotten too much sun. They looked back, and Polly was back working on her section, perfectly normal. Later that day, though, Polly started calling and waving again from the far edge. Helen ignored her this time, told Ellie not to look. They finished their work and headed back to the village. Ellie was so spooked, she ran straight to the elder's house to find Polly. She needed to know what Polly had wanted earlier. Victor's expression darkened. The elder answered the door. Polly, he said, had gone into town with the supply truck that morning. She hadn't been in the field all day. Ben felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cooling evening air. Goosebumps prickled his arms. So, who was it? Who did Grandma see? Victor shook his head slowly. Nobody knows, Ben. But that wasn't the end. After that, folks started seeing things out there. Sometimes it was someone they recognized. A neighbor, a friend, waving from the far side, beckoning them over. Sometimes it was a stranger. Sometimes... He hesitated, his voice dropping to a near whisper. Sometimes it was themselves, standing out there in the tall grass, smiling that same empty smile, waving them over. Ben swallowed hard. Themselves? Victor nodded grimly. Aye. Old man Henderson swore blind he saw his own double out there one twilight, miming for him to come closer. Scared him half to death. People started avoiding the field entirely. They held a meeting, decided to use the smaller, rockier pastures further down the valley for hay, even though it meant less feed. It just wasn't worth the risk. No one knew what would happen if you answered that call, if you walked towards that figure waving from the edge of the woods. And nobody wanted to find out. He clapped Ben on the shoulder, the gesture meant to be reassuring, but feeling heavy. So, we go around. Safer that way. Come on, daylight's fading, silenced. His earlier bravado evaporated. Ben followed Victor as they began the long, arduous trek around the perimeter of the vast field. The tall grass seemed to watch them as they passed. He kept glancing towards the center, half expecting to see a figure standing there, waving. He saw nothing but swaying green stalks, yet the feeling of being watched intensified with every step. The story wasn't just history. It felt like a warning hanging heavy in the twilight air. It was fully dusk by the time they reached the cabin. Ben felt drained, the hike compounded by the unnerving story and the detour. The cabin was exactly as Victor had described. A single windowless room built of massive dark logs with a heavy, iron-banded oak door. It looked incredibly solid, a fortress against the wilderness. Inside was sparse. 2 rough bunks with thin mattresses, a stone fireplace, a small table, and a couple of stools. Victor lit a kerosene lamp, casting long, dancing shadows on the walls. They unpacked efficiently. Victor built a small, contained fire in the hearth to take the chill off the mountain air and reheated some stew Helen had packed. They ate in near silence, the events of the day and Victor's story hanging between them. Ben noticed Victor carefully checking the heavy wooden bar that secured the door and ensuring both rifles, his own and a smaller one he'd brought for Ben, were loaded and within easy reach, leaning against the wall near the bunks. He offered Ben a small sip of whiskey from a flask for the cold, a gesture that felt more like fortification against unseen terrors than mere warmth. Exhaustion claimed Ben quickly despite the lumpy mattress. He fell into a deep, dreamless sleep. He awoke with a jolt. It was pitch black inside the cabin, the fire reduced to glowing embers. The kerosene lamp was out. He lay rigid, straining his ears. There it was again. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate, circling the cabin, crunching on the dry pine needles outside. His heart hammered against his ribs. Bear. He thought desperately. It has to be a bear looking for food scraps. He turned his head slowly towards Victor's bunk. In the faint, dying light from the hearth, he saw Victor sitting bolt upright on the edge of his bed, his silhouette tense and alert. Victor raised a finger to his lips in the universal signal for silence. He wasn't panicking, but the intensity of his focus was terrifying. Ben held his breath. The footsteps stopped right outside the heavy door. Silence pressed in, thick and suffocating. Then, a soft, insistent scratching began on the wood, like long fingernails dragging down the grain. It was a chilling, intimate sound. Ben clutched his blanket, cold sweat beating on his forehead. He could hear his own blood pounding in his ears. Victor remained still as a statue, his hand resting near his rifle stock. The scratching stopped. More silence. Then a soft, hesitant knock. Tap, tap, tap. Ben nearly jumped out of his skin. Victor slowly rose to his feet, moving with the silent grace of a hunter. He took 2 steps towards the door, positioning himself slightly to the side. "Who's there?" Victor's voice was low, steady, but carried clearly in the oppressive quiet. Silence. Only the frantic drumming of Ben's own heart answered. "Who's out there?" Victor repeated, a fraction louder. A sound came from the other side of the door, a voice, but it was wrong. Thin, reedy, like air escaping a punctured bellows, yet carrying an unsettlingly human cadence. "Good people, let us in." Ben's blood ran cold. "Us? We have no room," Victor stated flatly, his voice hard. "Be on your way." "We are lost." The voice wheezed, the words drawn out and distorted. "Show us the path." "You know the path," Victor countered, his knuckles white where he gripped his rifle. "Leave now." The response was another flurry of scratching, more frantic this time, moving higher up the door. Then it escalated into pounding. Fists, or something harder, hammering against the thick oak with jarring force. Bam! 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 The heavy door shuddered in its frame. Dust sifted down from the rafters. "Let us in!" The voice was no longer wheedling. It was a guttural shriek, filled with a terrifying, inhuman rage. The pounding became a continuous, deafening roar. Bam, 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 bam! The solid wood groaned under the assault. Ben could see the heavy bar vibrating, threatening to jump from its brackets. He curled into a ball, squeezing his eyes shut, convinced the door would splinter inward at any second. The air felt thick and cold, smelling of damp earth and something else. Something metallic and rotten. He tried to scream, but terror had sealed his throat shut. He felt consciousness slipping away, overwhelmed by the sheer, impossible violence of the assault and the bone-chilling sound of that voice demanding entry. He awoke to weak, gray dawn light filtering through the gaps around the door. He was lying on the floor, tangled in his blanket. Victor sat slumped on a stool just inside the doorway, which stood wide open. The heavy bar lay on the floor beside it. Victor's face was ashen, etched with deep lines of exhaustion and something else. Profound shock. A cigarette trembled between his fingers, trailing smoke into the cool morning air. The forest outside was utterly silent, the birdsong absent. Ben pushed himself up shakily. "Victor, what happened? Is it gone?" Victor took a long, shaky drag from the cigarette before answering, his voice hoarse. "It stopped just before dawn. The pounding, the screaming, just stopped, like it was never there." He looked at Ben, his eyes haunted. "Soon as it was light enough to see, I opened it. Nothing, not a footprint, not a broken branch. Nothing." Ben stared out the open door. The tall grass of the field shimmered with dew in the weak sunlight. It looked peaceful, innocent. The sight was somehow more terrifying than the chaos of the night. They packed their gear in a frantic, silent rush, not bothering with breakfast. They didn't speak as they retraced their steps around the vast, deceptively calm field and plunged back into the forest. The hike out felt twice as long, every shadow holding menace, every rustle in the underbrush making Ben flinch. The beauty of the forest had vanished, replaced by a sense of deep, ancient watchfulness. Victor moved with grim purpose, his rifle unslung and held ready. Reaching Helen's house felt like escaping a war zone. Eleanor took one look at their pale, drawn faces and knew something terrible had happened. They told the story haltingly over strong coffee, Victor recounting the events in a low, monotone voice. Helen listened, her face grim, nodding slowly as if confirming a dreaded suspicion. "Polly's field," she whispered when they finished. "It never truly rests." Ben never went back into the deep woods near Willow Creek. He spent the rest of his visit helping Helen with chores in the relative safety of the village clearing, the towering forest now seeming like a vast, brooding wall. He learned, weeks later, that Willow Creek was slowly dying. Families trickled away to towns and cities, unable or unwilling to live under the shadow of that field and the things it harbored. Helen passed away peacefully a few years later, one of the last true residents. The final blow came when two men, experienced woodsmen checking traps, vanished without a trace near the old hayfield. After that, the remaining few packed up and left for good. Willow Creek now stands empty, a cluster of decaying buildings slowly being reclaimed by the relentless forest. The grand trees stand sentinel over the clearing, and in the center, the tall grass of that vast field still sways in the wind. Sometimes, hikers who stray too far off the marked trails report an unnerving feeling of being watched from its center. Occasionally, they swear they see a figure standing motionless amidst the green stalks, too far away to make out clearly, but seemingly facing them, one arm raised in a slow, deliberate wave. They always turn back. The memory of what happened to Ben and Victor, whispered among locals in nearby towns, ensures that nobody, no matter how curious or skeptical, ever steps foot into that silent, beckoning expanse. The question remains, echoing like the phantom pounding on that cabin door. What waited inside the thing that demanded entry? And what happens to those foolish enough to answer the call from the edge of the woods? The answers, like the figures in the tall grass, remain hauntingly, terrifyingly out of reach.